Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker will talk on freedom and culture. Please welcome the Honourable Amanda Stoker.
Hello everyone. On Friday, I said goodbye to my grandpa Bill. And he was a simple man. He was at his prime a cable maker, later in life a janitor for my primary school. He was as rusted on as a Labor man could possibly be. And as I held his thin hand and felt his cool skin of a man once fit and strong, it really made me think about why we do all of this. Because it's not about money. No one ever lay at the end of their life lamenting that they haven't chased the dollar enough. For many of us, it's about faith. But for everyone, it is about family. It is about relationships with the people that we care about the legacy we leave behind as we love and provide for and educate the people with whom we are bound. And that, at its heart, is what everything we do in politics is about. Whether we call it economic policy or security policy or defence policy or social policy, everything we do has to be about empowering people to have those relationships. Some of you will have read that great American novel called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. In it, if you haven't read it, the institutions of America have crumbled, the mores by which we define ourselves as human as opposed to animal are completely gone. Desperate hunger and constant danger from what were once neighbours and fellow citizens have made it into a cruel dystopia. Now, it's beautifully written, but boy, is it grim. But in the course of it, there is this exposition of what it means to be alive, to be human, and how to grow what is good and what has meaning into something more. He calls it the fire. The fire is what we do that gives life a purpose and that gives humanity a future. When we think about what drives our best work, our most memorable days, what tugs at our emotions and what brings us hope and joy, that's a pretty good sign you're in the territory of the fire. Now, fresh into opposition, the Liberal Party is, or at least should be, in a period of thought and rebuilding. The time spent doing that now, reconnecting to principle as the foundation for good policy and decision making, will be determinative of our capacity to be relevant to the Australians whose trust we must once again earn in order to have the opportunity to govern. It all comes down to values. People can vote for you when they know what makes you tick. They can vote for you when they trust your vision for their own lives and plan accordingly. And better still, values are a compass by which to make the right decisions, even when you're under time pressure or facing competing pressures. There are people inside and outside of this room who believe not only that leftist thinking is in the ascendancy, but also that there's not much that can be done about it other than to wait for it to pass until voters have felt the catastrophe that lies at the end of the socialist rainbow and have had the hard-earned experience that makes a person into a classical liberal or conservative. To my mind, that's not only wrong, but it's plain lazy. Sure, it's true that the dominant culture at present is about feeling rather than thinking. It's increasingly about group identity rather than respect for the character of the individual and their contribution. And while all of those things were relevant in the last election result, it wasn't the only factor at play, let's be honest. Equally responsible was too many Liberals' willingness to just go along with cultural movements that they didn't truly believe in because they weren't willing to take on the zeitgeist. They were too afraid of being called a nasty name to speak up. For some, maybe unable to articulate why it is they believe what they do. But here's the thing. When you don't show up and make the case, you lose by default. The election might be lost and the prevailing culture might be challenging. But that fire that lies at the heart of conservatism hasn't been extinguished, and not by a long, long shot. So when we're faced with cultural challenges, the last thing we should do is run from them. Instead, we should fan the flames of the fire we still have, even if it is small, and nurture it with kindling to help it grow in strength and confidence until it roars, stronger than ever, valued, understood and appreciated by the generations that we will in time entrust with it. Indeed, it's my view that leaning into culture is the key to turning this society around. If you tried to come up with a short line that encapsulates the way the Liberal Party has gone about communicating its philosophy in recent times, it'd be something like the first few lines of Fleetwood Mac's great song Dreams from that album Rumours, and I'm giving away some of my music taste here. It goes, "Now here you go again. You say you want your freedom. Well, who am I to keep you down?" Now, this room is filled with freedom lovers, and I'm one of them too. But we shouldn't ignore the next line or two and the warning that it carries. It's only right that you should play it the way you feel it, but listen carefully to the sound of your loneliness. Now, perhaps there's some irony in someone like me taking instruction from Stevie Nicks. I should probably be a pretty interesting person, but there you are. But freedom is hugely empowering. To chart our own path, to be masters of our own ship, is core to human flourishing, though it's far from assured when it's viewed through that long lens of history. As Hobbes put it, for most of life, really what humans have faced is an existence that is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. It's really only Western civilization, built on that radical Judeo-Christian idea that we are all made in the image of God, that has made it possible. But, like Stevie Nicks warns, freedom can also be lonely. For without social connection, without roots, without the voluntary bonds of family, community, church, clubs and the like, it is to be cast adrift. All of this bears some connection to the social ills of our time. Mental illness at record levels, family breakdown, suicide rates that just won't budge despite taxpayer support that is greater than ever. And while all of us might be comfortable with Braveheart style, give me freedom or give me death, the COVID period showed us that far too many people in our society really don't share that perspective. Rather, they demanded that governments lock them in their house and rewarded governments that took away their freedom. Too many people misunderstand free speech as the mere empowerment of bigotry, and religious freedom is painted by some as just seeking a license to discriminate. It seems like freedom of association is only okay if you're using it for a trade union or BLM protest, but not if you'd like to seek an end to state government overreach. And so it's pretty clear that Australians' understanding of freedom needs a makeover. We need to help Australians understand what we mean by freedom and equip them to use those freedoms with wisdom. Now, if you dig back into the root of the word liberty, many of you will probably know this, it first meant freedom from the bondage of sin. Now, that's not just in a spiritual sense, it's also in a physical sense, freedom from slavery. I mention that because it draws out those internal and external elements. Yes, it is freedom to do as one chooses without other people confining that choice, absolutely. But it's also an internal freedom, a lightness that comes from making, as far as is possible, choices in our own lives and in our own actions that lighten conscience and allow us to live well according to our own value system for our lives. Many of you will know that Isaiah Berlin divided freedoms into two categories, freedoms for and freedoms from. Those of us interested in negative freedom or freedom from, as I'd suggest most of us are concerned with the obstacles that stand in the way of an individual acting with autonomy. It leaves the individual free to carve their path with low interference from the state, for better or worse. Positive freedom, or freedom for, looks to what's going on inside a person, asks what's holding them back, and then asks governments to step in and remove those internal barriers. Of course, there are massive problems with this. In some sense, it's work better done by a psychologist than by a government. And yet, I'd suggest that's the conception that's dominant in our time. It leads to big governments, cries for the government to step in whenever we see a subpar outcome in our community. But that stepping in comes at a huge cost. To the taxpayer, sure, but also to the learning and growth of the individual. There's also very little evidence that it works. However well-intentioned, every time we step in to prevent someone feeling the consequences of their actions, we deny them the chance to get the life experience that equips a person to triumph over what they believed once were their limitations. How many billions of dollars have we spent trying to break the cycle of social disadvantage in pockets of our community? And at what point will we start to see that aspects of the welfare system are the problem? We've spent literally trillions of dollars trying to improve the outcomes of Indigenous Australians in remote places. What if the answer were not more well-intentioned but hopelessly delivered social programs, but instead to allow Aboriginal Australians the right to use the lands over which they have native title the way that all of us have the freedom to do, to get a mortgage, build a house, start a business, craft their version of the Australian dream in just the same way that we in town get to. And as aged care gets more and more expensive for individuals and taxpayers, when will we have the tough conversation about how more of us need to be active in the care of our elders as they age? When will there's always going to be some circumstances where you need help beyond the home, but in so many other cultures, outsourcing is the exception rather than the rule, and it has benefits that go well beyond dollars and cents. The exact same argument can be made, and I think was yesterday from Matt Canavan, for the care of young children. In any event, let me see this idea. We love our freedom from, but it's presently misunderstood or applied in the extreme in many corners as something else, as licence, as freedom from consequences and the right to harm others. Licence can descend to dark places, to addiction, to violence and to abuse. So perhaps we need a new conception to deal with the misunderstanding that too many people have that freedom is just licence. Perhaps what we need is freedom with. I'll tell you what I mean by that. In 1991, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II delivered an address to the US Congress. She said, "Some people believe that power grows from the barrel of a gun," echoing the words of Mao. But she said, "So it can, but history shows us that it never grows well, and not for very long. Force, in the end, is sterile. We have gone a better way. Our societies rest on mutual agreement, on contract, and on consensus. Her Majesty was right. Our freedom from is not meant to be an experience of being alone in the world. It was never meant to be impunity for the needs of others. We get our freedom so that we can use it to voluntarily select the institutions to which we choose to give it, to mutually agree to give at least chunks of it away. When we decide to marry, we choose to lose some freedom, sure, but we gain companionship, satisfaction, a fellow traveller in the ups and downs of this journey called life, someone who always has our back. And when we decide to lose children, we lose freedom and sleep and many of the hobbies we once enjoyed, at least for a few decades, and it can be hard to get a trip to the loo alone, and I speak from experience. It's possible I'm sharing a little too much. But everyone, me included, will tell you raising children is both the hardest thing you will ever do and the very best thing you will ever do. When we commit to serve a footy team, the local school, the gymnastics club, the book club, our church, the Rotary Club, each time we give away some of our freedom to use our time, we voluntarily agree to abide by certain codes of conduct and rules. But what we get is enriching and free. Anyone who really gets, for instance, the Christian faith doesn't see it as a list of restrictive rules they have to follow. It's a code of behaviour joyfully adopted in gratitude for the great blessing of relationship with the Creator. And even if you're not religious, we are all beneficiaries of the civil society, the social contracts, and that spirit of consent that has made Western civilization freer and fairer than anything that has gone before it. This is the two-way street of life. The beauty of our freedom is multiplied when we use it to build our bonds with others. It is freedom with. Not an isolated, disconnected freedom to eschew our links with others, although, of course, we should be able to do that if that's what we really want to do. It's just that freedom with will grow the fire, while isolation lets it dwindle. Freedom with means we are not alone. Freedom with means that we are every day in our small actions changing culture, one by one, person by person. Freedom with reflects an understanding that it is our civil society that holds the key to our future as individuals, but also as a polity. It's our best protection against big government overreach that tells you, instead of asking you, what you need to reach your potential, and it'll probably demand you produce a form to show you've done it. Now, you might wonder, and I'm concluding now, why I've spent so much time thinking about this. It really is born out of a frustration over the last few years in dealing with parts of my own party. People who would call themselves classical liberals, and I think they were sincere about that, but seemed to find every possible reason when it came to the crunch to stand in the way of fundamental freedoms. When I realised that this misunderstanding about freedom was really at its heart, I also realised that it is helping people understand freedom with that was the key to unifying the party I love so deeply around the values that we all share. And in the post-materialist environment we face, we will not and we cannot win hearts and minds for the cause of freedom just by talking about dollars and cents. To keep running campaigns that only offer a one-dimensional, it's the economy stupid, will condemn us to opposition for a very long time. It only works when we connect the economy to the values that drive Australians in their lives, to help them answer that really difficult and personal question: what do I want to look back on at the end of this life? Too many people think Conservatives are preoccupied with money and economics, while really the left is about people and kindness. If Kevin Donnelly didn't just convince you of that, let me use the words of Barry Goldwater. Conservatism is not an economic theory, though it has economic implications. The shoe is precisely on the other foot. It is socialism that subordinates all other considerations into man's material well-being, sifting them into economic classes and demanding that they progress. Conservatives take account of the whole person, seeing him or her as both an economic creature but also, more importantly, a spiritual creature whose individuality, creativity and very essence matter. Many people talk about the needs of the common man and woman, but the conservative knows that we are not an undifferentiated mass. The very best of our history and development came from the initiative and ambitions of uncommon men and women. Our human differences are our strength. And so, as I leave the stage today, know these two things. First, you are not alone. The culture might seem woke, but look around you, here, now. There are lots of people who look and feel as you do. You do not need to be a quiet Australian anymore. Second, people talk about politics being downstream from culture. If you don't like what you're seeing in politics right now, it is culture where we must do the work. And it starts in freedom with involuntarily binding ourselves to others to build a legacy for our lives, for our families and for our nation that goes beyond anything a free man sitting alone could ever dream. Go forth and build a raging fire. Thanks very much. Thank you.